Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really happy you found your way to this event, to this Fireside Chat. Today we have Christian Busch as guest, and that is a serendipitous encounter in many ways, as we will discuss in the next 30, 40 minutes or so. As always in a Fireside Chat, we will open it up to you to ask questions and go deeper into aspects of the conversation and Christian's work as it arises in the first part of the session. Christian, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Max Henges. I'm the headmaster and CEO of 42 Wolfsburg and 42 Berlin. I'm super happy. This is the first time that we have some students join from the Berlin campus, the first event where we have students, Pisciners, on the campus. So a special welcome to you guys. We also opened this up to the 42 network. So if you are from a 42 school outside of Germany, why don't you give us a quick holler in the chat? Love to meet you all. Look at that. Folks from Portugal and Brazil are here, Christian. So we definitely have a very complex adaptive system in that 42 network, and that is prone to create the smart luck that you're so interested in. Two words for those of you who are not associated with 42 but watch this later on YouTube. 42 is software engineering school that works without professors or classes. We simply go by the love of coding and peer learning. So you learn with your peers, you find solutions to coding challenges that we set, and this is so successful that there is more than 30 schools around the world right now, more than 13,000 students. If you have not checked us out, do a quick Google. If you are interested in mobility or automotive, think about joining 42 Wolfsburg or 42 Berlin, because that's where we develop a unique specialization internationally. All right, Christian, anything we should know before we kick this fireside chat without a fire, I'm afraid, into gear? Any words of precaution or welcome that you want to set before I introduce you a little bit and pass the mic back to you?
Yeah, well, it's great to be here. Thanks so much, Max, for having me. Hi, everyone. It's great to see such a wonderful international audience. Very much looking forward to the conversation. Sounds like a lot of smart minds in the room, so looking forward to it.
Awesome. So believe it or not, Christian and I actually met for the first time about 10 minutes ago. So I found him online. I learned about his book and thought that it would make an excellent subject of conversation. Christian, as you know, we are all about software engineering. But we also think that it's humans that do the software engineering. So we care a lot about helping to train happy software engineers and software engineers that are capable to collaborate across cultures, across disciplines. And frankly, that there is a term that really is the anti-term for me, that is code monkey. Right? Someone who just looks at specifications and is able to write some code. No, we want smart participants in digital societies that are capable to navigate the different dimensions of human drama, serendipity, and organized human endeavor. And as such, we thought that chatting with you would be a great insight. When I read the book, or actually I listened to the audiobook, I know there are some aspects that I'd love to hear your views on, for example, on the maker schedule versus the focused manager schedule, very different aspects. So you just bring a pretty broad perspective on how to be lucky and be smart about finding the luck. that you seek each individually. So we don't know each other from prior history, but we share history. Actually, Christian and I both grew up in lovely Heidelberg in southern Germany. And you'll have to tell me which coffee shop it was that you gained your first work experience from. We also share, I think, quite a rough younger age. Yeah, I loved how you described the growing up, not really caring too much about school, but seeking adventure and living life to the fullest, and then ending up with a academic career that you have. We'd love to learn a bit more about those aspects as well. Well, without further ado, I'm going to share a couple of trust-creating titles, things that Christian has done over time that prove that he doesn't give up easy, and that he's indeed pursuing a good life and a life to the fullest. He holds a PhD from the London School of Economics and is now a professor at New York University, two exquisite institutions. And he is the co-founder and leader of a network that's called Sandbox, that you describe also in the book, that has a lot of the things that I think you found to be useful to create serendipity in the design of it. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that as well. He has published extensively, of course, in academic journals, but also more mainstream journals like the Harvard Business Review, Forbes, The Guardian, BBC, published his work, and you are one of the experts participating in the World Economic Forum. Christian, is there would be much more to say. That was a pick that I chose. Anything you'd like to add, or that I missed in the introduction?
I think that's great. It's great to be here. I mean, I think to your point that, what we seem to share indeed is when I grew up in Heidelberg, I was kicked out of school, had to repeat a year, probably held the unofficial world record of how many dustbins you can knock over on your way to school when you're driving. So I'm a big fan, especially of people who kind of go, not the straightforward way to something, but actually try to figure out, how do you channel your energy? And sometimes it takes time, and sometimes, you first do something else. And so I think you summarized that beautifully, that I guess we share that kind of slightly rebellious streak.
Awesome. Well, there is one very obvious reason that got us together here today. And that is that you wrote the book, The Serendipity Mindset, quite successful already. And maybe the first introduction you could give to the subject is there a way to cultivate serendipity, and what is serendipity in the first place? Maybe some of our listeners are not aware of what it is in general, and certainly your definition would be really useful.
Yeah. Yeah, and the backstory to this really is that, when I kind of was on that kind of slightly rebellious life back then, at some point I had a car crash and crashed into 4 parked cars, all cars completely destroyed, including my own. And I won't forget the policeman who came to the scene, and he was like, "Oh my God, he's still alive." And that idea that I was supposed to be dead, that stuck with me. And I asked myself all these weird questions, if I would have died, who would have come to my funeral? Who would have actually cared? Was it all worth it? And at that point, I had mostly depressing answers. And so it took me on an intense search for meaning, trying to figure out, what is this all about? What's life all about? Is it all worth it? And I read this amazing book, highly recommended, Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, which is all about how do we find meaning in tough situations. And when reading it, what I realized is what I enjoy doing the most is connecting ideas, connecting people, and seeing that spark that comes from those unexpected connections. And so I started out as entrepreneur, community builder, and then later went into academia. And what I found fascinating on this journey, and especially over the last 10 years of studying, successful CEOs, entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, developers, you name it, is that the most exciting, like the most inspirational people, they seem to have something in common, which is that they intuitively cultivate serendipity. They see a little bit more in unexpected moments, and then they connect the dots and turn that into positive outcomes. And so I got really fascinated by that question. Is there a science-based framework for this? Is there a science-based framework for cultivating this unexpected good luck? And so that's kind of, in a way, to your point, the way we look at it is to say it's very different from blind luck, right? Blind luck is the kind of thing that happens to us, being born into a nice family, stuff like that. We can't really influence that. But serendipity is active luck. It's the luck we create ourselves by how we respond to unexpected random moments, right? And so, I mean, take the example, if you have erratic hand movements like I do, you spill a lot of coffee. So imagine you spill coffee in a coffee shop over someone, and that person looks at you slightly annoyedly, but you sense there might be something there. You don't know what it is, you just sense there might be something there. And now you have a couple of options, right? One option is just you say, I'm sorry, you walk outside, and you think, what could have happened had I spoken with that person? Option two is you start that conversation, and that person turns out to become the love of your life, your co-founder, your name it. The point is our reaction to the unexpected, us making the accident meaningful, is what creates that serendipity in the end. And so I got really fascinated by that question of what are the patterns that we can understand from all these different examples that make us have more of this? What are the practices, and how can we have all more of that kind of smart luck, of that active luck?
Super cool. Let's dig into a couple of aspects. I'd love to learn later on the sequence, that process that you started to map out. But one aspect that when I read your book really stuck out to me is when you're in that mindset and you are creating that separate serendipity, and in a way you're creating opportunities, right? And what you have to do is you have to assess the opportunities. Is that the right opportunity to pursue, yes or no? And how far do I go, right? Do I experiment to a certain degree and then call it off? I personally find it easy to generate the opportunities, but I find it really difficult to choose wisely. And I felt it was particularly astute in this context that you described the story of the Princess of Serendip, right? The history where the word was coined. And I remembered a different history, and I wanted to see if you also know that, and there's simply several versions of it. I thought the three princes, the sons of the king, were sent out, and what their adventure was that they saw all these positive things along the road, but they were so single-mindedly going from A to B, their mission was to go to B, that they didn't see all the positive elements that were around them. Have you heard that version of the story? And what are your thoughts on assessing opportunities, seeing which luck is your luck?
Yeah, I mean, that story, you know, it's an exciting story, right? The origin story is essentially, you had those three princes. They kind of lived a very cozy life, and so their dad was, look, I got to put them out there, and like they got to, you know, like similar to how people when they travel, right? They're a bit more open-minded once they're out there on their own, kind of traveling around, and so they kind of have a lot of these unexpected things happen, and then by sagacity, so by doing something with it, they realize, oh, there's all these unexpected beautiful things out there, and so for them is that kind of journey. So I assume you had some kind of interpretation maybe that someone did based on how their previous life was and things like that. But I think to your point, that the really interesting thing about this is that what that origin story is all about is saying serendipity is not just something that's unexpectedly happening and that's it. It's about your sagacity. It's about what you do with it. It's about how you connect the dots. And Max, that comes back to your earlier point that what we've done a lot of our work is kind of diving back into both the kind of previous literature around it, that's the nerdy part, but also looking at hundreds of serendipity examples around the world and trying to understand what is the process behind it, because that's where it gets exciting, that it's not just an event, right? Blind luck is an event, like that just falls into your laps and that's it, like it's passive. But serendipity is an active process that's always the same, which is there's some kind of serendipity trigger, right? And I'll talk about an example in a second. But take the example that I mentioned earlier, where you bump into someone at a conference, or in this case, you spill the coffee, right? That's the kind of unexpected random event. By definition, we usually don't know when exactly it happens, how it happens, but it happens, right? It's that unexpected event. And now we have to do something with it. We have to connect the dots. We have to imbue meaning. We have to make it meaningful. by either thinking about how does it relate to a project I work on, or thinking about, oh my God, yes, that could be the love of my life. Like, let me see if I can go on another date, whatever it is, right? But then also a lot of times we need the tenacity to actually go through with it. And so that's kind of, in a way, when you think about serendipity in your own life, a lot of times there might be a very long incubation time, right? Like you might have this initial idea, but then it takes a long time until you really connect the dots and say, oh my God, like this is how I can make it happen. And so what I've become really fascinated by is to say, once we see serendipity as a process of spotting and connecting dots, we can learn how to create more of those potential dots. And we can talk about this, for example, things like hook strategies, how we can like seed more dots. We can learn how to connect them better. But also then we can kind of build that muscle for the unexpected that allows us to continuously turn that into positive outcomes. And I think that's where it gets really exciting. And, you know, one of my favorite examples that illustrates this is the potato washing machine. And, you know, the potato washing machine, essentially a couple of years ago, you know, there was a company, one of the largest companies in the world. They produce refrigerators and washing machines, and they received calls from farmers. And the farmers told them, your crappy washing machine is always breaking down. Why is the washing machine breaking down? Well, we're trying to wash our potatoes in it and it doesn't seem to work. So what would we usually do? We would probably try to, quote unquote, educate the customer, right? And tell them, don't wash your potatoes in a closed washing machine. It's not made for that. They did the opposite. They said, you know what? That's unexpected, but there's probably a lot of farmers in the world who have a similar problem. So why don't we build in a dirt filter and make it a potato washing machine? And that's how serendipity, so the potato washing machine became one of their products. That's, by the way, how up to 50% of inventions and innovations happen. It's something goes wrong, right? Like in the case of penicillin, like some kind of bacteria, like something goes wrong. And then you connect the dots and think, oh, but maybe I can use that. And, you know, I love talking with coders, developers, and others, because I feel a lot of times by accident, you come across something really interesting, right? And then you have to do something with it. It's not enough to just realize, oh my God, this could be, you know, a completely different sequence here, or whatever it is. Like you actually got to implement it and do something with it. And so long story short, I think that process you see with the potato washing machine, right? Like there is this unexpected trigger, like farmers calling up and saying, this doesn't work. But then we have to imbue meaning. We have to make it meaningful. And that's how serendipity tends to happen.
Yeah, and you mentioned in the book also that to have a safe space for the experiments that result out of the serendipity is really important. And I think that's especially true for educational setups, like higher education institutions, right? I see our job as 42 staff really in providing a learning ecosystem where you can make as many mistakes and fail again and again and trying different things out, trying different roles, because that's the unfortunate truth. I think even when you are out for the smart luck, you only know in hindsight whether that actually was a great idea. You know, this farmer called me up, told me about he's washing his potatoes. It might be, you know, you're out on a goose hunt. So that evaluation, I think, is something where a lot of experience plays in, right? When the better you understand the field, you see the landscape of a certain opportunity, serendipity, chance in front of you. And there is, of course, another word in your book that I find super fascinating. I don't know if you Googled me before. I started out in computer science and business and then ended up with a PhD in philosophy. So I actually developed a model for a mindset model for entrepreneurship in my PhD. So very much attuned to thinking about this command and control part of our existence in our head as produced by a mindset, or in German Weltanschauung, which is actually a term that is in the English Wikipedia. So check that out if you're curious. I think it's close to mindset, but how do you describe mindset and why is it a useful term in this context?
Yeah, no, I love that word, by the way, the German one. I feel it's you know, that's one of the things about the German language, the concreteness of, like, you know, how you put like 3 words into one and you're like, that's the Weltanschauung. But so it's exactly along the lines, right? Like how do we look at the world and what do we do with it, right? Like in a way, you know, I'm a big fan, you know, when you think about how you can put people into exactly the same situation, but depending on how they look at the world and what they do with what they're seeing, they will have very different outcomes, right? So let me give you an example. You know, and I'd love everyone, please, if you can put into the chat, do you consider yourself to be a lucky or an unlucky person? Lucky or unlucky? If you just put, if you only have those two extremes, you can choose lucky or unlucky. Dejan says unlucky.
Really, Dejan, I don't believe a word. You're always so positive.
Niels lucky. Juan lucky. Akretu lucky. Alexander lucky. Little lucky. Somewhat lucky. Yeah. So we
they've all gone through a pretty rigorous selection process. So I think they feel that you know, that was a significant aspect of luck. So that might explain a little bit of it.
Oh, I love also what Pietro says here. In Italy, we say, help yourself and God is going to help you. That's really interesting. I had a conversation recently with a very religious person, and you know, we kind of, you know, they came from the perspective of, look, like, isn't like there's like destiny in some way, and like, you know, isn't it already playing out? And then obviously I come from the perspective of you can create a lot of luck in your own life. And so we met in the middle and we said, you know what, like, and it's related to that story. I don't do the story justice, but the story is essentially this kind of person is always praying to God and saying, please God, let me win the lottery. Please let me win the lottery. And then nothing happens, and he prays again. And then at some point he's like, but God, why don't you let me win the lottery? Well, you got to buy a ticket. Like, I can only let you win if you buy the ticket. And so it's so I like that. So we met in the middle saying, look, like, yes, but also you gotta still do something in life if there is the case that there might be some kind of higher power. And I think, by the way, in general, that's always really interesting, right? That I think what I've appreciated the more I think about things like meditation and else is that religions have prayer. People who believe in nature maybe have meditation in nature, but in a way, everyone somehow wants to connect in some way or the other, right? Beyond themselves. And so I think it's a beautiful question always to think about, how do we all long for connection and where do we get the connection from? And I think serendipity is a beautiful way, by the way, of meaningful connection. But to your point, I think, and the reason why I asked lucky versus unlucky is, and it seems to be a very lucky room here, by the way, is that those of you who consider yourself to be lucky tend to be luckier in the future. Not because of some kind of abracadabra, it falls into your lap type, you know, manifestation thing, but actually because the Weltanschauung, because the view of how one looks at the world might be slightly different. And so let me give you one experiment example. And there's a lot of these kind of experiments, but it's one of my favorites, where they pick people who self-identify as very lucky. So people who say, good things tend to happen to me, and so on. And then people who self-identify as very unlucky. So people who say, bad things tend to happen to me, I'm always in accidents, and those. And we probably all know people on that continuum, right? Between like very unlucky and very lucky. And so they pick one of each and they say, walk down the street, go into a coffee shop, sit down, and then we'll have our conversation, our interview. What they don't tell them is that there's hidden cameras alongside the street and inside the coffee shop. There's a £5 note, so money, right in front of the coffee shop door. And inside the coffee shop, there's one empty chair next to this extremely successful businessman who can make big dreams happen. Now, the lucky person walks down the street, sees the £5 note, picks it up, goes inside the shop, orders the coffee, sits next to the businessman. They have a conversation, they exchange business cards, and potentially an opportunity comes out of it. The unlucky person walks down the street, steps over the £5 note, so doesn't see it, goes inside the shop, orders the coffee, sits next to the businessman, then ignores the businessman, and that's it. At the end of the day, they ask both people, how was your day today? And so the lucky person says, well, it was amazing. I found money in the street, made a new friend, and, you know, potentially an opportunity coming out of it. The unlucky person just says, well, nothing really happened. And you see that a lot with couples, like who meet exactly the same people, who are in exactly the same situations, but one seems to be a little bit luckier than the other. Again, there's a lot of things to this, and we can dive deeper, right? That it helps to talk with people. So people who are inclined to talk with more people tend to have more serendipity with people. But actually, a lot of times serendipity comes from silent sources, right? It comes from reading a book and connecting the dots. It comes from looking at a code and thinking, oh my God, like this could relate to this thing here. Like, why don't I change this here? And so it's those kind of thing where there's a lot of hope also for introverts and for people who might not be the kind of most extroverted of all. And so, you know, I find a lot of money in the street, for example, because I expect it to be there. Like once you open your eyes to it, in my case, mostly pennies, unfortunately, so it doesn't really change my lifestyle, unfortunately. But the point is, once we open our eyes to the unexpected, to the positively unexpected, it tends to happen more often. And that's why I'm such a big fan of really thinking about how every interaction can be a source of serendipity. How do we ask questions slightly differently? How do we cast hooks so that every conversation can become the source of serendipity, because it's everywhere, it's potentiality.
I love it. I think there is one super essential element that needs to happen for you to even answer the question whether you're lucky or unlucky in a meaningful way. And that is enlightenment. You have to accept that you have a free will in order to overcome. Sorry, not to feel lucky or unlucky, but to be in charge of that element. And I think what you're describing is everybody can be lucky if you choose to be, right? It's actually not necessarily a destiny. It's more a choice and a practice that you're promoting. Is that a fair way to frame it?
Yeah, and to your point, right? So there's this kind of this agency, right, that we have in almost any given situation. And we could talk about Viktor Frankl, how in the most toughest of situations where theoretically there's no agency, he still found agency. So I think there's a lot about how we create meaning in every situation. But then, you know, what I think is extremely important also is that, yes, of course, we have very different starting positions, right? So I do a lot of work in the Cape Flats in Cape Town, or in Kenya, in Nairobi, in some impoverished areas. And an entrepreneur in that area has a very different starting position than me sitting in the West Village in New York. So my potential serendipity potential is much bigger. But what I found fascinating is that even in those tough contexts, you will see that some people tend to be luckier on that lower level than others because of the kind of mindset that they practice. And so it's fascinating to see how we've seen that emerge in almost every context. But obviously one of the key, and you hinted to that earlier, one of the key things that I hope that does that serendipity mindset also is to think about the structural challenges that the entrepreneur in Kenya doesn't have that access. So how can we not only think about giving them a scholarship, but also about 3 mentors that help them have more serendipity and things like this, where we can structurally help people have more serendipity and multiply their potential serendipity by how we create their surroundings. And so I think I think agency is important, but at the same time, removing barriers for those people who might not have that much agency by power dynamics and everything else is extremely important. But I think you hit on a really important point, and maybe just bringing that home by giving you one example of how you can have that agency of creating more luck in your own life. I'm a big fan, for example, of the hook strategy. And the hook strategy is all about saying, how can I use every interaction, every conversation to seed a couple of meaningful points that other people can connect for me. So for example, let's say I'm a developer that would love to live in Budapest and currently is writing a code in something that I probably would not understand, but you might have a particular code language or so, but you also just became a new parent. Now, if you would go to a conference and someone would ask you the kind of what do you do question, you could either say I'm a developer, and then you would go on autopilot and the conversation wouldn't go into a lot of directions. Or you could introduce yourself by saying, I'm a developer, currently exploring a move to Poland, just became a parent, what I'm really excited about and learning about it. And then what happens a lot of times is people might say, oh my God, such a coincidence. Like, I've also become a parent, let's have a beer together. And then that person becomes the person who says, by the way, you know what? My uncle actually also, like, he lives in Poland and he's currently kind of doing XYZ thing. Let me put you in touch. And so it's this beautiful thing where once we start putting a couple of hooks out there of different interests we have or different needs we have, people can start connecting. And from the most unexpected of areas come the most kind of interesting introductions or ideas and everything else. And someone who does that really well, by the way, is Ollie Barrett. He's the founder of Startup Britain. And if you would ask him, what do you do? He wouldn't just say, I'm a technology entrepreneur. He would say, I'm a technology entrepreneur, recently started reading into the philosophy of science, but what I'm really excited about is playing the piano. And the amount of times where people might say, oh my God, such a coincidence. My sister's teaching on the philosophy of science. You should give a guest lecture and all these kind of things. It's just mind blowing because there's all this social capital out there, but people can't know what you need unless you tell them. And so I think it's this kind of thing of we can all like be more conscious of how to put those hooks out there. I'm a big fan of doing a serendipity journal where you write down what are 3 or 4 interests I have at the moment, and how do I bring that into every conversation? too late to a meeting. Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm late to the meeting. I was just thinking about how to get to Poland, but now I'm here. So excited to be here. And like really kind of building that into every sentence in every conversation.
There's a fellow, John Serendipity. Do you know him? The Big Five for Life. And he also does exactly these experiments, right? Like, how do you actually get to meaningful encounters by asking important questions, you know, not talking about the weather. I mean, it's a nice hook to get a conversation started, but, you know, really get to stuff that you care about. And you will find that many people have interesting things to say about those things that you care about. And, you know, especially if you're not single-minded, but throw out a number of them. I really like the idea. Where I disagree a little bit is in describing some people having less agency than others. And actually, I'm a bit surprised. We'll talk about Viktor Frankl in a little bit more, because he's the perfect example that there's always agency. And in fact, it is your mindset. It is the way that how you look at it, whether you're stuck or whether you know, you find a solution. And so in a way, this internal locus of control is, I think, the terminus technicus to describe whether people feel that they are in charge of their lives or whether the outside is determining where they are. And I hope that you know, more and more people see that they are in charge, and that indeed they cannot, you know, you cannot become everything. Not everybody can become president of the United States or, you know, multimillionaire, but within reason, there is a lot that you can move. Now, before I get to asking you a couple of questions about book recommendations that you have for our manual for happy software engineers, and before the students get to ask some questions or wade in with their perspectives, I wanted you to elaborate a little bit on Paul Graham's piece about a maker schedule and a manager schedule, because while I think you're very clearly interested and focused on this chance creating smart luck, serendipity, right? Putting out a lot of hooks. You're also aware that you need to focus, and that it's kind of a balance, right? Between this time where you go out and you discover new things and time where you get stuff done and you're creative by yourself or in a small group.
Absolutely. And maybe very briefly, right, to your point around, is the locus of control, like where is it located? How much agency do we have? To me, this is a really big one, because a lot of my work is in extreme poverty contexts. And so in extreme poverty contexts, you know, we might always assume it's just economic constraints or whatever it is, but a lot of times it's power dynamics, right? So essentially look at the rickshaw puller in India who, yes, they might now, you know, have good business and build this, like buy a second rickshaw, but it's never their rickshaw. It's the rickshaw of the local mafiosi who owns the local rickshaws. And so essentially you can create some luck, but there's a limit on how much luck you will potentially have. And so I liked your point earlier that in a way, there's something we can do in every situation. And then there's some kind of objective constraint that are there. So it's almost like the objective and the subjective, right? That the objective one, we as community builders, as educators, we can help recreate that and we can help shift that, right? How power dynamics work and so on. And then there's the subjective one, which is the individual and the mindset piece that you're alluding to. And I think you made that point, right, with Viktor Frankl. That's always been one of my absolute favorites in terms of how Frankl, you know, he was in the toughest of situations you can imagine. He was in the concentration camp. You can imagine it's a completely objectively hopeless situation, right? There's no meaning whatsoever, subjectively or objectively. And so essentially he said, okay, look, what can I do in this situation? And so he did things like talking with other prisoners daily. And by knowing, oh, I still have to talk with all these people, he now had a reason to wake up tomorrow morning, right? So he created a meaning in that. Or he said, I still have to write this book, so I have to get out and have to write that book. And so it's this fascinating thing where you can create, even in those kind of situations, some kind of meaning. And again, then of course, we from the outside, you know, if you would liberate the camp, like you would objectively remove any constraint on that. So it's kind of those things where I think I've been fascinated by both the subjective and the objective that I think we're talking about. And I think, you know, your school is an interesting example, right? How you try to figure out how do we build a breeding ground where people can multiply a little bit of that serendipity in their own life. So I think that's really interesting. To your question, I think, you know, the maker versus manager schedule, I've always found that really interesting because You know, I still remember, and so the gist of it is to say, look, you know, you have people who are on a maker schedule, so that's the kind of people meeting, and if you ask someone on a manager schedule for a quick meeting, it'll only take you the time of the meeting, right? The 5 minutes for the meeting. But then you have the people who are on the maker schedule. Like when you're writing deep code, like when you're really embedded in your kind of setting, like you are so focused that if someone comes by and asks you for a quick coffee, it doesn't only cost you the 5 minutes for the coffee. It costs you the time to get back into it. It costs you the time to open everything up again and stuff like that. And so there's a lot of research around this idea that, you know, people have very fast, like they've been so focused on open office space and yay, and everyone engaging and everything else. And that a lot of times leads to decreasing productivity, right? They tested that with developers, with coders, with researchers, that if you put them into complete open office spaces, their productivity goes down because they're constantly interrupted. Versus if you have people who are who have their space protected, then they can focus on something, they can go deep. And then maybe there's public areas where they can bump into people. So you give them kind of both of the two worlds. And so I've realized that in my own life, I do a lot of work that's in the maker schedule. So I do conceptual work, I do deep work where I have to really focus. And for a long time, I also had that combined with a manager schedule where I would take a quick call for a company, I would be involved in a quick this. And I always felt depressed at the end of the day because I would be like, I didn't get anything done because I had these quick meetings in between and they always pulled me out. And so one thing I've learned for myself is to block time for me in the early mornings where nobody gets a meeting, nobody gets anything. Like this is the time where I just focus, and then the kind of meeting stuff is in the afternoon. And for my well-being, that has done wonders in the sense of that then you feel you've got done already the peak stuff, the maker stuff, and then the rest is kind of like, okay, great, let's do that, and so on. And so I think it depends, of course, how much power you have over schedule, but finding out when is the peak energy time, how can I use the peak energy time for the really important deep stuff, and then the rest kind of like for the stuff that has to happen as well, has helped me a lot. So I think this Paul Graham post is a great one, which you copied in here, makers versus manager schedule.
Yeah, same experience on my side. I have to admit, it's not easy to find the right balance and especially to block off longer pieces of time. Coming back to agency, right? Some meetings are just thrown on your calendar, but it's not magic, right? It's a question of good habits and knowing your pace, knowing whether you are a morning person or a night person, and these things do stick with you for quite a while. Ladies and gentlemen, I have offered to give the mic to whoever wants to come in twice already, and I will do so now live on air again. Do raise your hand, especially if you're an introvert, especially if you usually don't ask questions. Do think about a question, do participate in this chat. And this gives us the opportunity, though, Christian, that I can ask you about some book recommendations. A little bit of background for those who don't know. At 42 Wolfsburg and 42 Berlin, we love books. We think they're great, especially if they have a long half-life, right? I don't think you need to print things that you read only once and that are kind of out of date very soon. But there's great books that talk about the history of ideas that really help you see things in context. And yes, software engineering is our main course, but then we're also interested in that manual for happiness. And we actually do have Viktor Frankl's piece in there already, but we never had somebody really make the case. You've elaborated on it before. Why do you think that is one that we should definitely include?
Yeah, no, and I think that's I had a conversation actually earlier with someone who teaches a lot of MBA courses. And one of the things we talked about is, I wish the world had more philosophers or like philosophy courses where people just ask why all the time. Because at the end of the day, a lot of the things everyone struggles with is, you know, symptoms. And like there's a symptom, but then if we ask why a couple of times, we get to the root cause and figure it out. And I think that's what philosophers do intuitively when they ask why all the time. So I'm a big fan of thinking about exactly what you just mentioned, like what are books or what is knowledge that's out there that gives us a slightly different perspective of what we're working on. And if you think about the Renaissance people, right, they were so good at connecting dots because they had an interest outside of their like expertise, and that allowed them to connect the dots so much more effectively, especially in bigger ways. Like when you're a very deep expert, you usually make a lot of incremental change, right? Step by step by step. But if you're really kind of like understanding a couple of different areas, then you go in and say, my God, I understand quantum physics, and I understand that that relates directly to how the world works. And then you connect the really interesting dots. And so it's those kind of things where Viktor Frankl, you know, for me is one of the best books one can ever read, because it's so much about exactly what we talk about, that we cannot always pick the situation we're in, but we can always pick our response to it. And that's where our freedom is, that's where our liberty is, and that's where in a way our serendipity is. And I'm a big fan of that idea that we always have more agency than we think we have. Maybe to give you a quick example, I work a lot with people who come from very tough backgrounds, you know, people who were in prison, they come out and, you know, they don't have a lot of social capital. Their CV is not really that usable in terms of, you know, there's this couple of year gap where, hey, what did you do in this time? Well, you know, I was kind of on holidays. Well, but, you know, not necessarily voluntary holiday and so on. And so for those kind of people, what I do a lot with them is to really figure out, how can you leverage the social capital of others? If you don't have that, how can you, for example, think about in your city, let's say you're in Berlin or in Wolfsburg or in London or wherever you are in the world, what are public events where it's going to be a full room? So, you know, let's say at the public university locally, right? Wolfsburg or Berlin, like Humboldt, there's a public event with like an amazing person, CEO or whatever. You go to that event, you go in the audience, and then whenever they open up for questions, make sure it's an event where they will have a Q&A, but whenever they open up, you're the first person who stands up energetically so that they can't ignore you, not too much, but like energetically. So a moderator is always grateful to the first person who stands up, because you're always waiting. You don't want that awkward silence. And so like be the first one who stands up as soon as they say it. And then you ask your question. And the way you ask your question is to say, thank you so very much for this great speech. So you make it all about the speaker, all about them, as someone who just experienced XYZ. So you build in your hook however much you feel comfortable. It could be something like, as someone who just went through a rough patch and is now looking for a coding experience in XYZ sector, whatever it is, I wanted to ask you, what do you usually advise people? Whatever it is. But what matters is not what you ask the person. What matters is the hook you build for everyone else in that room. Because afterwards, there's always 4, 5, 6 people coming to you out of the audience saying, my God, such a coincidence. My brother like just went through a rough patch and he just got a really good coding job. Like, I'll put you in touch. And so it's amazing how the social capital that is in that room can be leveraged by just building one smart hook, where then everyone in a way hears about that hook and you become the speaker for literally 20 seconds, right? And so it's those kind of things, Max, where I feel that Frankl to me opened up that idea that in every situation, there's something you can do, even if you don't think you have a lot of agency in that moment. So I think that's to me a favorite. Another favorite is really Brené Brown. She has been doing a lot of work around power of vulnerability and how we think about that vulnerability might not always be a bad thing. It might actually be something where once you understand your fears, you understand what you're afraid of, whatever it is, and then you start articulating this first with people you trust, but also more broadly as a leader at some point, the more trust you can build and the more you can actually rally people around you if you don't overshare, right? Nobody talks about oversharing and going all out there, but it's about building genuine, meaningful connections. And so I'm a big fan of that book as well. And then third, I'm a big fan of the work of Adam Grant. And he wrote a book recently with Sheryl Sandberg, the former COO of Facebook. And that book is called Option B, and it's all about resilience and how do we, especially in tough situations, build resilience and the grit that we need to go through a tough world.
Wow, that was really efficient. Thanks for rocking all three of them. I would actually love to turn to the event space, as there is a brave soul who raised his or her hand and would like to ask a question or bring in his or her perspective. Please, if you have the mic, do come in, please.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Santiago. First, thank you very much for the great conversation, Christian Busch. It was a really, really nice talk. Well, I wish I had prepared a better hook, but I'll just jump straight into the question. The thing is, yeah, when you're talking, there is this quote from Pasteur, right? That fortune favors the well-prepared, or the well-prepared mind. And I think this whole conversation actually echoes that sentiment for sure. And yes, that you brought up a lot of different elements to this conversation. There is reframing of mind, of the challenges we have ahead. There is a lot of associative thinking and action that it's also quite coming time and time again, associating different areas of expertise and just within your life, broadcasting your interest very openly to people you interact with, and some risk taking. So there's all these elements that you are, I feel, correct me if I'm mischaracterizing, but you are bringing up in this, let's call it this net that you throw into the waters and try to catch something in the ocean of serendipity, let's say. So maybe that sounds like a lot of elements and can be kind of daunting to try to put things into concrete advice. And that's the purpose of the question. Like, let's try to ground it. We're here in the 42 network. There's usually people in the 20s, early 30s that they're trying their hands at coding. For this group of population, these students in this age range, what kind of practical advice would you give for building this net of being able to catch some opportunities, let's say?
Yeah, thank you for the fantastic question. And you know, I think you captured this really nicely. That's exactly the way I think about this. That in a way, it's like different, like Venn diagrams, right? Where you there's all these different pieces to it, and then like there's the serendipity mindset, or the kind of serendipity in the middle. And the beautiful thing is you don't have to have all of them. You know, you can, for example, be a very pessimistic person. It helps you to be more optimistic, because a lot of times that shows your potentiality and it lets you imagine different futures differently. But actually, you know, I have very pessimist friends, some of them, but they're extremely good dot connectors, right? They're extremely good at seeing how things connect and do it. And so I think that the beautiful thing about this is that you don't have to be great at like all of them. You can literally pick the ones that feel most authentic to you, and then dive into those. So for example, you know, I'm a very big fan of what we just talked about in terms of thinking about the social capital component and how much potentiality there is in relationships, and really using very simple things like the hook strategy, where I would literally go down now I would go home and say, what are 3 things that are really kind of key challenges for me at the moment that I want to explore, and how now can I bring that into every conversation? Next time I have a call with Max, how do I say, hey, Max, so great to see you. I was just thinking about how I can develop XYZ new code, but now I'm so excited to be here, and just seeing what happens. And if you do that with 5 or 10 people, they might be like, oh my God, such a coincidence. Let me help you out here. I just programmed something similarly, or whatever it is that in a way brings it. So first of all, my absolute kind of recommendation, there's the hook strategy. You can use it with everyone in every context. A second one that I'm a big fan of is to think in every conversation, can I imbue some meaning in this, especially in situations that go wrong? So if something kind of like, if something doesn't work in application or something like this, is that an opportunity to rethink XYZ source code? Or is that an opportunity to say, you know what, maybe that's a sign that this wasn't supposed to work that way. Maybe we get another iteration of user feedback and think about if that actually made sense, what we're doing here, if it just kind of like is a brainchild of something that we were just hoping could work. And I think, you know, especially when you use design thinking and those kind of iterations, what you realize is that failure, to Max's earlier point, is a necessary part of the process. Like it's not a kind of, it's not a bug, it's a feature, right? Like it's kind of like it's coming back and back and back and back and back, because it's part of getting the best version of what it could be. And so I'm a big fan of literally looking at every situation, especially when it doesn't work, and saying, what can I see in this moment now that could still help us to do something even better? And, you know, in my case, it usually applied to companies almost going bankrupt and then realizing, wow, that forces us to change the business model and make it a much more exciting business model, or things like this. Another one, and what you see here, right, is that, and that's also, you know, in the book, the Serendipity Mindset, one of the key things is that you have so many exercises that you can use depending on what you're most excited about. If you're naturally liking to go out there and engage with people, you can use the hook strategy. If you're naturally more the kind of, you know, reserved person, maybe you think in every conversation, can I connect one thing here? Can I make one introduction? Can I relate this idea to one other idea? Just something that trains you in connecting the dots a little bit more in things you anyways have to do. And so the long story short is, I'm a big fan of small shifts using small exercises like this in the day-to-day. And then as it happens, you get more and more excited about it. And then you're like, oh my God, give me more, give me more. It's almost like I shouldn't say that, but like a drug where like once you get hooked on it, you're kind of like, oh my God, I want more of this. I want more of this, because it is so joyful to then see that every moment can be an opportunity in itself. And then I think to Max's point, the challenge almost becomes to what's a good filter now? How do I, when I have all these opportunities, but I actually really need to get this one thing done, what is a good filter for me? The filter that I've always found really interesting is to either, in my case, it's my wife, where I just bounce the idea directly off and she kind of like is yes or no. And then I put it, if it's a no, I put it on a parking lot. So it never feels I'm losing the idea. I'm just literally putting it in a Google Doc and then I'm saving it there. So it doesn't feel I lose it, but I'm just saying, no, this is a distraction at the moment. Pixar does it, right, with a brain trust, where informally a couple of people, whenever ideas come up, they say, okay, this could work, this couldn't work. So I would build in very kind of simple mechanisms to say, okay, at the moment this makes sense versus this doesn't make sense. But as you can see, like I think there's a lot of these kind of pragmatic things we can all do in our day-to-day life, and it depends what we feel at the moment feels most authentic to us.
Christian, you are so eloquent. It's wonderful to follow the different steps that you're taking and sharing with us. I have one last question, as I don't see a question from the audience come in, but if somebody does raise his or her hand, maybe we can still squeeze one more audience question in. When I was at Stanford, I was quite impressed by PJ Fogg's work in the Persuasive Technology Lab. I don't know if you have heard of that. They are looking into creating those habits, those little, small interactions, especially stuff in software that makes it sticky. And it was super successful. And, a bunch of books were published on it. The big Valley companies all looked into how to create those stickiness in their apps. And the question that I have has to do with what happened next, right? A lot of the people who were studying this all of a sudden felt responsible for what they felt was an abuse of the insights that they had created, right? And all these people are losing all the time on apps that they never really wanted to spend that much time on. And in a similar way, do you have guidance or thoughts on that inner compass that allows you to decide? You've just alert to it, you're getting feedback, right? You don't want to rely on your own judgment only, you bounce it off your wife. Any other guidance in terms of understanding what's good and what might be a good path forward, what might be a bad path forward? And you're muted, Christian.
Oh yes, perfect. This works hopefully. No, I'm a huge fan of thinking about what are some non-negotiable values. What are some non-negotiables here? It's something that I've realized too late in life. And then, I've been in situations where I had trade-offs, right? Sometimes you have trade-offs between loyalty and integrity, or excitement and responsibility, things like this, right? And where whenever you face a trade-off, if you always start at zero and think, oh my God, which one could work now? That in a way makes you potentially weak towards like seductive kind of temptation. It'll, oh my God, this is a lot of money in this technology, so I should go for this. And then you look back in 5 years and say, oh my God, it's really been abused now. And I saw it coming, but it didn't, do something about it because I wanted another car in the garage, like stuff like that, right? Where if you would have defined the non-negotiable that if this is ever going into X, Y, Z direction, I will not do it, then it makes it easier in these trade-off situations to have a very clear idea of what you will choose and what not. And I've had that in situations with investors, right? Where I would kind of like sometimes like trust my brain, where my brain would be like, yes, they seem to be completely aligned. They tell you all the right things, like all the right things are happening. But in my gut, I knew there would be a mission drift at some point. And I knew that there would be something. And so you kind of feel this like, and you let your brain decide, but actually you should have aligned with your gut. And so I've become a huge fan of informed gut feeling, in terms of saying, whenever there's a decision situation, to really listen into the gut and then not acting on it, but really kind of taking the time and researching more information and thinking about what is the gut trying to tell me? Why is, because the subconscious obviously always knows more than what we can capture in our mind. So what is this trying to tell me? And then like, if there's more information about this person, about the company I sell the technology to, whatever it is, and then researching more around it, and then aligning between the head and the heart and the gut in a way. And I think to me that has come later in life.
I've got to break in because now we do have 2 questions. And,
Max, I have to jump. I have a hard stop, but it was such a pleasure to be with you today. I mean, such a great group of people. I'd love to continue the conversation. Please do connect LinkedIn, Twitter, wherever you are.
I hope it was not the last time. I'm sure some of our students feel encouraged to reach out. And yeah, it's been a very, very nice conversation. And hopefully sometime we get to host you in 3D, either in Berlin or in Wolfsburg, when you're back in your original country. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Have a great evening.
See you all.
Good
Great to meet you.
Bye.